Hello friends, and welcome to your pre-Thanksgiving beer review. So tonight I will be reviewing what is technically, I suppose, a macro lager, but is, well, not a macro lager, but a macro brewed beer. Now this is Leffe Blond. This is a Belgian beer, and it comes under the category of an Abbey ale. Though I've also seen it classified as a Belgian pale ale, but I actually think it's closer to an Abbey ale in taste profile than anything else. But it's called an Abbey ale, but it's actually owned and brewed by InBev AB. So basically, the same company that owns Budweiser and about 1/3 of all alcohol made on this planet owns this. Originally, it was brewed by monks. Now they just sort of license out the name from the monastery that originally brewed it. That being said, you're probably not going to find any cheaper or wider spread Belgian product available. I got this in a 6-pack for $8.50, which means that for you guys on the mainland, you can probably get it for around $7, which is pretty damn good. So, it's a little bit smaller than a 12 ounce. It's a European size bottle, so 11.2 ounces. And it's 6.6 ABV, which means, of course, that it's, got a nice little kick to it. Oh, so why don't I read the back here in, the ad copy. Leffe Blond, savor the mystery of the ages. Award-winning Leffe Blond is a full-bodied, deep golden ale that is surprisingly subtle and delicate. Belgium's classic Abbey ale is best served in its own chalice-shaped glass, accentuating the ale's aroma and creating the perfect head. Speaking of head, this thing tends to create quite the head, so I'm going to have to pour it really carefully. Okay, there we go. No overflows this time. Like I said, it really creates a head. Which is kind of interesting because I believe that this is actually force carbonated instead of being bottle conditioned, which is probably why it's so cheap compared to most Belgian beers, as most traditionally made Belgian beers are all bottle conditioned, which means that the carbonation is a creation of the final fermentation within the bottle as opposed to it being carbonated at the factory. Not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of craft beers are actually force carbonated. It's especially anything that you get on tap. Basically, things on tap, are force carbonated. Unless, of course, it's on cask, which is traditional, but there's only a handful of places that do true cask ale here in the States. You'd have to go to England to get true cask ale. Okay, so it's a lovely, lovely yellowish to orange. It almost seems to have a nice transition from the bottom to the top here, as it kind of goes from a rich yellow, rich golden yellow to an almost deep, well, I wouldn't say, to a nice orange yellow, with a fine, thick, fluffy, persistent head. Fluffy white, persistent head. And very active carbonation, as you can see here. Very sweet smelling. Very fruity and estery. Hints of, I would say that the strongest yeast element into it, well, yeah, the strongest yeast element is probably the clove. That's what I'm really getting. hints of florals, but the florals are not very pronounced in this. And a pretty distinct graininess under the sweeter phenolic and estery notes. It's a beautiful head, I have to say. You can kind of see it. It just so slowly recedes, and it kind of leaves like these little snow drifts of foam. On the negative side, there is a slightly metallic off-scent to the nose. It tastes very Belgian in regards to it having that distinctive yeast flavor, as well as the sort of added rock sugar that they use in brewing Belgian beers. You can really taste the candy rock sugar. Towards the end of the middle part of, the tasting, there's an intense sweetness, but it's very effervescent and it passes quickly. It's just sort of leaving the ghost of sweetness on the tongue. And there's not much hop to it. You don't really get much hop, either the volatile essence of hop flavoring or the bittering essence on the tongue. It's just very lightly there in the the lasting finish. The front and middle, the esteriness of it is very sweet. Bubblegum, juicy fruit. And when I say juicy fruit, I don't mean juicy fruit, I mean like juicy fruit gum almost. Bits of coriander flavor in the middle, mid-palate, but not as intense as in some other Belgian beers. It's very thick, but it's very thick. But that's balanced by the higher carbonation. Well, yeah, it is pretty carbonated, but because of the thickness, it tends to balance it pretty well. Some touches of bananas, but not really as strong as its sort of bubblegum and juicy fruit flavor. I'm going to try and suss out the front a little bit better. There's a spiciness in the front. Sort of a little clovey bite that's kind of hidden by the carbonation, but it's also there in the flavor. The sort of biting aspects of clove-like spice, almost like having a clove cigarette. And in the finish is a sort of orange peel-like note that becomes apparent as it warms up a little bit. If it's a little bit on the colder side, it's kind of hidden by the chilling aspect on the tongue. But now that it's warming up, I'm getting a nice orange peel flavor towards the finish. The sweetness is also increasing, but yet for some reason I don't find the sweetness very cloying, because it disappears off the palate pretty quickly. It just leaves a little bit behind. It doesn't stick to the tongue. It's just very intense while it's there. So I guess it's not really cloying, but just an intense, brief, intense sweetness before, you know, the hops and whatever else kinds of just takes it off the tongue. So this sort of gets mixed reviews. One, because, you know, it's brewed by a macro company, so that gives it a lot of that hit in a lot of people's minds. That's a hit against them. In my mind, I don't care. I'm not a craft beer aficionado. I am a good beer aficionado, and it just so happens that craft beer tends to be good beer. In that respect, Leffe is a good beer. By no means is it complex as most other Abbey ales, especially true Trappist ales, but it is still very drinkable, and I would say a very good introduction to the Belgian style that isn't too intense in flavor, isn't too complex in flavor, and isn't too alcoholic. Getting a double, triple, or quad would probably go and put, you know, a beginner on their ass. So, you know, because it's cheap, because it's pretty widespread due to its macro status, I would highly recommend that people who are interested in getting into the Belgian style of beers start with this one. It's not the most complex. It's nowhere near the best, but it's good, and it's sort of quintessentially Belgian in its flavoring and its styling. So, what's your beer review for tonight, folks? And I forget what they say in Belgium for cheers. Slante? No, that's Irish, I think. Well, whatever it is, cheers.